Hi, I'm Alice Berger. I'm a local college professor, and I also teach watercolor and acrylics and other fine art classes. And I'm an award-winning artist as well. I've sold my work nationally. So today we're going to talk about watercolor based on the show by Private Miller. And he basically took things from everyday life. So I have with me, I have some photos that I've taken on the fairgrounds. I happen to love scarecrows. So I have some pictures of those guys as well as some animals, which I love. I have some watercolor. These are actually graphite pencils that are water soluble. So you can draw with them and then they kind of become part of the painting. So I'm going to use those. They're by Charisma. And then I have some pan paints. This you can get at Michael's. They're very inexpensive. And then I also have, you can get these at Michael's also. They're watercolor pencils that you can kind of mix in for the paint. So I'm using this, what we call a watercolor block. This is 140 pound. Now this one is not this is kind of the rough finish. And I like the paper having a little bit of texture on it instead of it being totally slick. So if you don't get a block, you have to tape your paper down on all four sides so it doesn't warp. But the block will keep it from warping as much, and you leave it on here till it dries. I'm going to be drawing a little scarecrow and then putting color to it. Okay, so I'm just going to do a light sketch. Now this is just a really rough sketch, and I'll fine tune it with the watercolors as I go. I'm just drawing his hat with the band on, and here comes the scarecrow's face in here. And here comes all the straw part where it's coming out of his hat and neck area. Do his little overalls here for the other side. Okay, so you notice this has a real sketchy quality to it. Now I'm going to draw his one arm coming off to the side here. Put a little fold in there. This side, I'll have a little bit of the straw coming out the end. Okay, so this pencil is going to blend with my watercolors, and I'm trying not to make too dark marks. We have this little windmill over here. All right, and then some more of the green here, the fields. So if I wanted to, what Private Miller did was then he went in with his marker. I don't know if you guys can see that, and then made a little bit darker marks on this. All right, just to define things a little bit better. Now you can take photographs like I did. Some artists prefer to work plein air, as they call it. So this is a rougher paper, so it's kind of absorbing the marks of the marker a little bit. Okay, but anyway, I think you can see the face there. So now I just have a little peanut butter jar that I'm using for the water. And with watercolors, you work from lighter to darker. You go from light to dark. So I'm just going to use the lid to do a little mixing here. A little bit more water. Okay, mix a little bit of brown in with this. Okay, so I'm just going to put where the shadows are. And now this is a Sharpie marker that I used at first, so it's not going to run. My pencil will, however. Okay, so I'm going to put some out here where the straw is coming out. You can see that that pencil's kind of blending in a little bit there. Okay, so now I'm just going to change the brush sizes here. Now these watercolors, you probably can't tell, the ones I'm using right now are, they're metallic, but I don't see the metallic quality showing up right here, right now. Just color in his eyes a little bit. I like to use round brushes, but you can also use a flat, what they call a flat brush, which has a little bit of squared tip to it. I like the rounds because they're very versatile. Nice thing about these pan paints, you can just let them dry. They're very portable. This is a very light palette to carry around. And when you're doing watercolor, you see my water's still pretty clear. You don't want your water to get muddy because then it changes your color that you're painting onto the paper. And so right now I'm putting on the main color, and then I'll go back and add some more details to it. Switch back to my bigger brush. It's a little shadow for the hat here. So I'm just going to put some sky back in here. Okay, I try not to get too close to anything that's really wet because it'll run into each other. Now it's good to kind of mix colors around a little bit so it doesn't have that pure painted look from the palette that you're using. So I can kind of mix in some colors as I'm painting this on. Now I like the rough paper because I can kind of drag my mark and it gives it a nice quality. My brush, there we go. So you see I'm adding some other greens in there. Okay, so this is called blocking in the color. And then while it's wet, I'll add some other colors in there. Now you can probably see the paper warping just a little bit. I need to bring this green down in here too. So of course the more water you use, the more chance you risk of it warping, but that's okay. I can actually let this dry on the block. And the block has an unglued section at the front here where you just put a little kitchen dinner knife underneath there to peel it off. You can have your parents help you with that. But don't do that until it's dry. Yep. And if you see a little spot like that where it accidentally blobs onto something you don't want it to be on, just get a paper towel and dab it. Alrighty. Oops. So now I've got to paint some little stripes on his overall and he has a little red patch here too. Okay. It's kind of like a little gingham patch. Alright, now here comes the stripes. Alright, so this is when you have that round, it comes in handy. So I'm not going to draw all these on here, but just a couple. And I like to try and vary the pressure that I'm applying to the brush so it gives me kind of a different line quality. So maybe I just want to hint at some of these and not actually paint them all. So you can see I'm almost painting dry brush on some of this because the paper is rough. So when it runs out of moisture in the brush, then you'll have to get some more paint. Now I'm painting with a red sable brush, but you can use the nylon brushes that you get at the store. They have little sets that have different sizes in. Those will work just fine. I kind of tend to be tough on my supplies, so the red sable brush can take a lot more, work, and it'll last a long time. I've had these brushes for more than 20 years. Okay, you just have to remember to wash them out when you're done. All right, so that's enough stripies on that. Maybe I'll just continue that a little bit. So you see I really did make some of the lines thicker, thinner. All right, now there are shadows on the jumper, or the shirt, I should say. They're very light ones. Get some folds in here a little bit. Now I'm just going to go back in and add some details. And these you can work as much or as little as you want to. Now I've got this little windmill back here, so I'll just do some of the blades on that. Just kind of more like on the abstract, because I don't want it to take away too much from my scarecrow. And I'll go in and add some details in here. It's still a little wet, so I have to be careful because it'll run a little bit. But sometimes it's nice to have that blended in look there. Trying to get a heavier shadow in here. I want to make his hat look like it's actually sitting on his head instead of floating away, so that's why it's important to put the shadow in there. Now, to see if you have a right amount of detail, sometimes it's a good idea just to kind of squint at something, and it helps you to see the value in the shading. So you noticed how I did go from light to dark? Now if I wanted to, for emphasis, I can also use these watercolor pencils here. I could go in, this one is black. So for really super small things, I could go in here and draw this buckle on here. And again, these will bleed when water hits them, but they're great for causing, you know, little bits of interest that you want to have. If you didn't quite get your color the way you wanted it to be. And then I could take the brush and add a little water to that. And kind of smear it in so it looks more like a watercolor instead of a pencil drawing. Okay, so go back in and add just a couple more details in here. Okay, now I'm just kind of look at this and say, where do I need some more detail? So mixing some other color in here besides green. Again, I'm just trying to weight the scarecrow a little bit because of gravity, so he doesn't look like he's floating. All right, let's see. There's always more details I can put in. So this is what you call a watercolor sketch, just a real quick representation of what I saw this day that I photographed with my camera. Kind of like the Impressionists, they made a really quick observation. Okay, so I'm just putting little bits of color around. You know, if you wanted to for fun, you could paint a little bird on the scarecrow's arm. The scarecrow's not really scaring things away, he's just kind of a friendly scarecrow. Okay, so that is it for now. I could go back and visit this a second time, as long as I keep it on here so it doesn't, you know, warp too much for framing. So you see how I kind of use some negative space, the outside area, to define this arm a little bit. Okay, so that's it. So have fun. Well, I'm going to give you some little tips for when you're doing this on your own, okay? Now, if you have a hard time drawing something, the brain has a symbol in its mind of what something is, and so to kind of fool it to get your thing more accurate is you just put everything upside down and look at it. You look at your photo and you go, oh, okay. Well, for you guys it's upside down, but for me it's right side up. But anyway, you look at it and you can actually see your drawing mistakes. Another little tip you can do is, to help speed this along, is most watercolorists, most artists have a hair dryer. And you just run it over the painting to get it to dry, and then you can go back in like I have done on this one. This one's not quite done. It's actually a watercolor card. And if you open it up, you can see it you see how the paper's kind of wrinkled a little bit? So this wasn't on the block, so it did wrinkle a little bit. But now I would go in on this. It's almost done, but it needs a little bit more detail, some of the hairs on the squirrel. And I go in and do that, maybe dry brush with very little liquid. I can even use a little toothbrush, which I did down here, and you kind of use it like a fake airbrush, and you get paint on the bristles and you spritz the card for a little texture. So that's a fun thing to do. Okay, so for this guy, I would just build in some more detail. I probably make a little bit more shadow in here, but it's a very good start. I would also recommend that you hold it back like a viewer would, maybe about 7 to 10 feet, and see if any of the details fall off too much. Then you can go back in and add some more shadow. So have fun painting.